Today, we're diving into the eternal law of non-hatred in today's world. Join us on this enlightening journey. If you appreciate the Buddha's teachings, please help us share this wisdom by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Thank you for being with us. The eternal law of non-hatred in today's world. In today's world, we are surrounded by hatred, conflict, and division. Whether it's within our personal relationships, communities, or on a global scale, the escalation of anger and hostility seems to be a constant. Social media is rife with arguments and vitriol, political debates are polarized, and entire nations are embroiled in conflicts that have lasted for decades. Amid all this turmoil, we may find ourselves wondering, how can we put an end to this cycle of hatred? How can we find peace when everything around us seems so divisive? The answer to these questions can be found in the timeless wisdom of the Buddha, who, more than 2,500 years ago, offered a profound teaching that remains as relevant today as ever. Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. This verse from the Dhammapada speaks directly to the heart of the human condition. In a world full of anger and retribution, the Buddha's message is clear: responding to hatred with more hatred only perpetuates suffering. The only way to truly overcome hatred and bring peace to our lives and to the world is through non-hatred, through love, compassion, and understanding. This teaching, simple yet profound, is especially relevant in today's cultural and social landscape. With the rise of tribalism, online shaming, and identity politics, we live in a world where it's easy to get caught up in feelings of anger and animosity toward those who hold different views or who have wronged us. But as the Buddha reminds us, meeting hatred with hatred only deepens the divide and leads to more suffering. To break this cycle, we must find a new way forward, one rooted in empathy, kindness, and forgiveness. In this introduction, we will explore how the Buddha's teaching on non-hatred can help us navigate the complexities of modern life, offering practical solutions for transforming our relationships, communities, and inner worlds. By examining the nature of hatred and the power of non-hatred, we can begin to understand how this ancient wisdom is not just a spiritual ideal, but a practical path to peace that we can all walk in our everyday lives. The ubiquity of hatred in modern culture. To understand the significance of the Buddha's teaching, we must first take a closer look at how hatred manifests in today's world. Modern society has made incredible technological advances, but it has also created new forms of division and conflict. Social media platforms, while designed to connect us, often amplify anger and outrage. In the anonymity of online spaces, people feel emboldened to express their frustrations in harmful ways, attacking others for their beliefs, choices, or mistakes. The result is a toxic environment where hostility festers and escalates. Beyond the digital sphere, we see hatred playing out in our political systems, where debates have become increasingly polarized. Instead of engaging in thoughtful dialogue, people on opposite sides of the political spectrum often resort to personal attacks and name-calling. This not only prevents constructive problem-solving but also reinforces the us versus them mentality that fuels animosity. Hatred also seeps into our personal relationships. When someone wrongs us, whether a friend betrays us, a partner hurts us, or a colleague undermines us, our first reaction may be to retaliate, either directly or indirectly. We might lash out in anger, seek revenge, or hold on to resentment. These responses are understandable, but they do not resolve the underlying issues. Instead, they prolong the pain and create deeper wounds. The Buddha's teaching offers a way out of this cycle. It reminds us that responding to hatred with more hatred, whether in the form of an angry tweet, a heated argument, or an act of revenge, only perpetuates suffering for everyone involved. To bring about true peace, we must approach these situations differently. We must learn to respond with non-hatred. Non-hatred, a radical but practical solution. At first glance, non-hatred may seem like a lofty or idealistic concept. How can we be expected to respond with kindness or understanding when someone has hurt us deeply? How can we refrain from anger when we see injustice in the world? Yet, non-hatred is not about suppressing our emotions or passively accepting wrongdoing. It is about cultivating a mindset of compassion and understanding, even in the face of harm. Non-hatred requires a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing the person who hurt us as an enemy, we learn to recognize their humanity. We acknowledge that they, too, are suffering in some way, and that their actions, while harmful, may stem from their own pain, fear, or ignorance. By seeing others through the lens of compassion, we can begin to break down the walls of anger and resentment that keep us trapped in the cycle of hatred. This does not mean we ignore harm or injustice. On the contrary, responding with non-hatred allows us to address issues more effectively. When we approach conflicts with a clear mind and a compassionate heart, we are better equipped to find solutions that promote healing and reconciliation. Anger, while it may feel powerful in the moment, clouds our judgment and often leads to decisions we later regret. Non-hatred, on the other hand, opens up space for creative problem-solving and constructive action. The practice of non-hatred in daily life. So, how do we begin to practice non-hatred in our daily lives? The Buddha's teachings provide several practical steps that we can take to transform our responses to hatred and cultivate peace in our hearts and minds. Mindfulness of emotions. The first step in practicing non-hatred is becoming aware of our emotions as they arise. Often, we react to situations out of habit, without fully understanding what we are feeling or why. By cultivating mindfulness, we can observe our emotions: anger, frustration, resentment without immediately acting on them. This pause creates a space in which we can choose how to respond, rather than being driven by our impulses. Compassionate understanding. Once we become aware of our emotions, the next step is to cultivate compassion for ourselves and others. This means recognizing that everyone, including ourselves, is doing the best they can with the knowledge and resources they have. When someone acts out of hatred or anger, it is often because they are experiencing suffering themselves. By seeing this, we can respond with empathy rather than hostility. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is a powerful practice that helps to release the grip of hatred. It does not mean condoning harmful behavior or forgetting the harm that was done. Rather, forgiveness is about letting go of the desire for revenge and freeing ourselves from the burden of resentment. When we forgive, we liberate ourselves from the cycle of hatred and open the door to healing. Loving kindness meditation. A central practice in Buddhism for cultivating non-hatred is loving kindness meditation. This practice involves silently repeating phrases of goodwill and compassion, first for oneself and then for others, including those we find difficult. By regularly practicing loving-kindness meditation, we train our minds to respond to others with compassion rather than anger, even in challenging situations. Non-harmful communication. How we communicate with others plays a significant role in either perpetuating or resolving conflict. Practicing mindful and non-harmful communication involves speaking truthfully, but with kindness and respect. It also means listening deeply to others, trying to understand their perspective before responding. This approach to communication helps de-escalate conflicts and fosters mutual understanding. The social impact of non-hatred. The practice of non-hatred extends beyond personal relationships. It has the potential to transform entire communities and societies. In a world where hatred and division seem to dominate the headlines, the Buddhist teaching offers a path toward social healing. By embracing non-hatred, we contribute to a culture of peace and understanding. Imagine what our world would look like if more people chose to respond to hatred with non-hatred. Political debates would shift from hostile confrontations to respectful discussions where different views are heard and considered. Social media platforms could become spaces for genuine connection and learning, rather than arenas for outrage and cancel culture. Even in the face of global conflicts, nations could work toward peace and reconciliation through dialogue and mutual respect, rather than perpetuating cycles of violence and revenge. This is not to say that the journey toward non-hatred is easy. It requires patience, perseverance, and a willingness to look beyond our immediate emotional reactions. But the rewards are immense. By practicing non-hatred, we not only bring peace to our own hearts, but we also contribute to a more peaceful and compassionate world. The eternal law, a timeless truth for modern times. The Buddha's teaching that hatred can only be appeased by non-hatred is not just a recommendation, it is a universal law, a timeless truth that has held throughout human history. We can see its evidence in both small and large-scale examples. On a personal level, those who let go of hatred and embrace compassion experience greater peace and happiness. On a societal level, movements rooted in non-violence and non-hatred such as Gandhi's struggle for Indian independence or Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights movement have achieved lasting, meaningful change. In today's rapidly changing world, this eternal law remains as relevant as ever. The forces of hatred may seem overwhelming at times, but they are not invincible. By practicing non-hatred, we have the power to break the cycle of anger and hostility, both in our own lives and in the broader world. This is not just a spiritual ideal, it is a practical and achievable path to peace. As we embark on this journey of non-hatred, we are not only transforming our own lives but also contributing to a global movement toward compassion, understanding, and true reconciliation. The path may be challenging, but it is the only path that leads to lasting peace for ourselves, for our communities, and for the world. Chapter 1: The Cycle of Hatred in Modern Society. In today's world, the cycle of hatred is more apparent than ever before. Across every level of society, whether in personal relationships, political conflicts, or cultural divides, hatred seems to be a constant undercurrent. From online trolling to political polarization, racial tensions to workplace disputes, we see hatred manifesting in countless forms, intensifying the pain and suffering people experience. The Buddha's teaching, hatred is never appeased by hatred, by non-hatred alone is hatred appeased, has never been more relevant. But what is this cycle of hatred, and why does it persist so strongly in modern society? In this chapter, we will explore how hatred escalates in our culture, why it is so difficult to break free from, and how the Buddha's teaching can offer practical solutions for individuals seeking peace in their lives. The amplification of hatred in the digital age. In today's digital age, hatred is more visible and more easily spread than ever before. Social media platforms have given everyone a voice, which can be both a blessing and a curse. While these platforms enable connection and expression, they also provide a stage for anger, resentment, and hatred to be broadcast and amplified. Online forums and comment sections often become hotbeds of vitriol, where anonymous users attack one another with harsh words and hateful speech. Whether it's over politics, religion, or personal disagreements, these platforms often devolve into battlegrounds where hatred festers and multiplies. The problem is not just that people are angry or frustrated, it's that digital platforms encourage us to react immediately, without reflection. This instant reactivity feeds the cycle of hatred. A person sees something they disagree with, and instead of taking a moment to understand or respond thoughtfully, they lash out. The recipient of that hatred then retaliates, and the cycle continues, often escalating into a level of animosity far greater than the original issue warranted. Political polarization and cultural divides. Hatred also thrives in the polarized political climates that have become common in many parts of the world. In countries like the United States, where political division has reached a fever pitch, individuals on opposing sides of the ideological spectrum often see each other not just as opponents, but as enemies. This deep-seated animosity manifests in every facet of public discourse, from cable news to dinner table conversations. The us versus them mentality fuels a cycle of hatred that is hard to escape. Each side feels justified in their hatred, convinced that the other is morally wrong, dangerous, or a threat to their way of life. This is not just a matter of intellectual disagreement, it is an emotional reaction steeped in fear, anger, and often, hatred. The Buddha's teaching that hatred cannot be appeased by hatred directly challenges this mindset. When we respond to our perceived enemies with more hatred, we only strengthen the divide and escalate the conflict. In political and cultural spheres, hatred becomes self-perpetuating. Each hateful act or word is met with an equally strong reaction, deepening the chasm between opposing sides. The personal toll of hatred. Hatred does not only affect society at large, it takes a deep toll on individuals as well. Carrying hatred in our hearts can be like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. We often believe that holding on to anger or resentment will somehow protect us from further harm or give us power over those who have wronged us. In reality, it is the opposite. Hatred consumes our mental and emotional energy, clouds our judgment, and prevents us from experiencing peace. Take, for example, a personal relationship where betrayal or deep hurt has occurred. It is natural to feel anger, sadness, and even hatred when someone has caused us pain. But what happens when we hold on to that hatred for weeks, months, or even years? It doesn't heal the wound, it only makes the pain worse. The more we dwell on the wrongs done to us, the more we trap ourselves in a cycle of negative emotions. We replay the situation in our minds, justify our anger, and convince ourselves that we are right to hate the person who hurt us. In this way, hatred creates an internal prison. While we may think we are punishing the other person, the truth is that we are punishing ourselves. Our mental and emotional well-being suffers, and we become unable to move on or find peace. Breaking the cycle, understanding the nature of hatred. To break free from the cycle of hatred, we first need to understand its nature. Hatred is not an inherent part of who we are, it is a reaction to perceived threats, fears, or injustices. In Buddhist psychology, hatred, along with greed and delusion, is considered one of the three poisons that cloud our minds and lead to suffering. Hatred often arises when we feel that something important to us, whether it be our beliefs, our identity, or our sense of security, is being threatened. This is why hatred can feel so powerful. It taps into our primal instincts to protect ourselves. But while hatred may give us a temporary sense of control or superiority, it ultimately leaves us more vulnerable to suffering. When we respond to hatred with more hatred, we reinforce the very thing we are trying to overcome. This is why the Buddha teaches that non-hatred is the only way to appease hatred. Responding with non-hatred, whether it be through compassion, understanding, or forgiveness, interrupts the cycle and creates the possibility for healing. The practice of non-hatred in daily life. So how can we practically apply the Buddha's teaching of non-hatred in today's society? The first step is mindfulness. We need to become aware of when hatred arises in our minds and how it manifests in our thoughts, words, and actions. Hatred often begins as a small irritation or frustration that, if left unchecked, can grow into full-blown animosity. By practicing mindfulness, we can catch these emotions early before they spiral out of control. Mindfulness meditation is a powerful tool for cultivating awareness of our emotions and reactions. In meditation, we can observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment, allowing us to see hatred as it arises and let it go before it takes hold of us. This practice helps us create space between our emotions and our actions, giving us the ability to respond with non-hatred rather than reactivity. Another important aspect of non-hatred is compassion. When we feel hatred towards someone, it is often because we see them as fundamentally different from ourselves. We view them as the other, someone who is threatening or wrong. Compassion allows us to break down this barrier and recognize the shared humanity in all people, even those we dislike or disagree with. Practicing compassion does not mean excusing harmful behavior or accepting injustice. Instead, it means understanding that the person we hate is also suffering in some way, and that their actions are often driven by their own fear, pain, or ignorance. When we can see others through the lens of compassion, we are less likely to respond with hatred and more likely to approach the situation with kindness or understanding. Forgiveness, a key to breaking the cycle. Forgiveness is another essential practice for breaking the cycle of hatred. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting or condoning harmful behavior, it means letting go of the resentment and anger that keep us trapped in suffering. When we hold on to hatred, we are the ones who suffer most. Forgiveness frees us from this burden and allows us to move forward with peace. Forgiving someone who has wronged us is not easy, but it is possible. It often requires time, reflection, and the willingness to let go of our attachment to being right. By practicing forgiveness, we can release the grip of hatred on our hearts and open ourselves to the possibility of healing and reconciliation. Non-hatred is a path to peace. In today's world, where hatred seems to be a constant presence, the Buddha's teaching offers a radical yet practical solution. Non-hatred is not about passivity or avoiding conflict, it is about actively choosing to respond with compassion, understanding, and forgiveness. It is about breaking the cycle of reactivity and creating the conditions for peace. By practicing mindfulness, compassion, and forgiveness, we can bring non-hatred into our daily lives and relationships. Whether it's in the way we respond to a hurtful comment, navigate a difficult conversation, or engage in political discourse, non-hatred allows us to approach every situation with a clear mind and an open heart. This path is not easy, but it is transformative. As individuals, we can contribute to a culture of peace by embodying the principles of non-hatred in our interactions with others. When we choose non-hatred, we break free from the cycle of suffering and open the door to a more compassionate, harmonious world. In the following chapters, we will explore the tools and practices that can help us cultivate non-hatred in our lives, as well as the broader implications of this teaching for society as a whole. For now, the first step is to recognize the cycle of hatred in our own lives and make the conscious decision to respond with non-hatred, in alignment with the Buddha's eternal law. Chapter 2: The Power of Non-Hatred. In today's fast-paced and often polarized world, the Buddha's teaching on non-hatred can seem both simple and radical. Yet, it remains profoundly relevant. Whether we look at social media arguments, political polarization, family disputes, or global conflicts, hatred seems to be everywhere, often masquerading as righteous anger or moral superiority. However, the Buddha teaches that hatred only breeds more hatred, and this cycle of retaliation never leads to peace. In this chapter, we will explore the transformative power of non-hatred and how we can apply this ancient wisdom to modern life. Understanding the nature of hatred in modern society. In the digital age, hatred is more visible than ever. Social media platforms, comment sections, and even news outlets are often filled with vitriolic comments and extreme viewpoints. Hatred, or more broadly, animosity, becomes normalized as people increasingly use these platforms to express anger and frustration. Whether the subject is politics, religion, or personal identity, hatred fuels the way we communicate, reinforcing divisions between people. Hatred in today's society is often fueled by feelings of injustice, fear, or a sense of being wronged. This is exacerbated by the echo chambers many people find themselves in, where their views are constantly reinforced by like-minded individuals. When our beliefs are never challenged, it becomes easier to dehumanize those who disagree, seeing them not as individuals but as enemies who must be defeated. This is where hatred takes root, growing from an emotional reaction to a sustained mindset that can lead to real-world harm. But while hatred may feel justified in the moment, it is ultimately corrosive. It distorts our perceptions, traps us in cycles of anger, and prevents us from seeing the humanity in others. In the long run, it harms not just those we target but also ourselves. Chronic anger and resentment can lead to stress, anxiety, and even physical health issues. Moreover, it robs us of the ability to experience joy, peace, and connection with others. The Buddha's teaching on non-hatred offers an antidote to this, providing a way to step out of the cycle of anger and hostility and into a more peaceful way of living. The concept of non-hatred. Non-hatred is not just the absence of hate, it is an active force rooted in compassion, empathy, and understanding. It does not mean being passive in the face of injustice or turning a blind eye to harm. Instead, non-hatred means responding to negative actions and emotions in a way that de-escalates conflict, promotes healing, and fosters connection rather than division. Non-hatred requires a conscious shift in perspective. It asks us to see the people we perceive as enemies not as embodiments of evil but as fellow human beings, each shaped by their own experiences, traumas, and fears. By cultivating this perspective, we are better equipped to respond to hostility with patience and understanding rather than with anger and revenge. In the context of modern life, non-hatred may seem impractical. After all, how can we not hate those who spread violence or promote harmful ideologies? The Buddha's teaching, however, invites us to look deeper. He reminds us that hatred only perpetuates suffering. When we meet hate with more hate, we add to the pain and deepen the division. The cycle of conflict continues. But when we respond with non-hatred, we open the door to healing. How non-hatred can transform our relationships. In personal relationships, non-hatred is a transformative practice. Whether it's a family argument, a falling out with a friend, or tension with a colleague, we often feel justified in holding on to anger. We replay the wrongs in our minds, building a narrative that casts us as the victim and the other person as the villain. This kind of thinking only entrenches the conflict, making reconciliation harder and deepening the emotional wounds. However, by practicing non-hatred, we can break this pattern. When we catch ourselves in the cycle of resentment, we can pause and take a step back. Instead of feeding the fire of anger, we can choose to soften our hearts and ask ourselves questions like, what is this person experiencing that led them to act this way? How can I respond in a way that promotes understanding rather than retaliation? What do I really want out of this situation? Is holding on to my anger helping me get there? These questions help shift our perspective, allowing us to approach the situation with compassion and clarity rather than anger. In this way, non-hatred doesn't just de-escalate conflict, it creates space for healing and growth. For example, imagine a heated argument with a close friend. You feel hurt and betrayed, and your instinct is to lash out, to make them feel the pain that they caused you. But before reacting, you remember the Buddha's teaching on non-hatred. You take a deep breath and think about the situation from their perspective. Maybe they acted out of insecurity or fear, or perhaps they were carrying their own unresolved pain. By choosing to respond with kindness or by giving yourself time to calm down before addressing the issue, you break the cycle of anger. Instead of escalating the conflict, you invite dialogue, healing, and possibly a stronger bond in the future. The role of non-hatred in social and political discourse. In our broader social and political lives, the concept of non-hatred can feel even more challenging to apply. We live in a time where political divisions are sharp, and debates over social issues are often marked by hostility. It's easy to feel that our opponents are not just wrong but dangerous, and this can lead to intense hatred. Yet, non-hatred offers a powerful way forward. By choosing to see our political or ideological opponents as human beings with their own fears, values, and experiences, we create the possibility of dialogue and understanding. This doesn't mean that we have to agree with harmful policies or tolerate injustice, but it does mean that we resist the urge to demonize and dehumanize those who think differently. One practical way to apply non-hatred in political and social discourse is to practice mindful listening. Often, we listen to others not to understand but to argue, to prove them wrong. However, by approaching conversations with the intention to truly understand the other person's perspective, we foster a culture of respect and empathy. This doesn't mean abandoning our principles or not advocating for what we believe in. It means engaging in a way that seeks resolution rather than perpetuating conflict. A modern example of this can be seen in restorative justice practices, which aim to resolve conflicts through dialogue and mutual understanding rather than punishment. In these practices, the focus is on healing and reconciliation rather than retribution, reflecting the Buddha's teaching that hatred can only be appeased by non-hatred. These practices have been shown to be highly effective in reducing violence, repairing relationships, and fostering community resilience. Non-hatred is a path to inner peace. At a personal level, practicing non-hatred is also a path to inner peace. Holding on to hatred and resentment weighs heavily on the mind. It creates a sense of tension, anger, and bitterness that colors our experiences and prevents us from living fully in the present moment. By letting go of hatred, we free ourselves from this burden and open up to more positive and peaceful emotions. One way to begin cultivating non-hatred is through the practice of metta, loving-kindness meditation. In this meditation, we actively cultivate feelings of goodwill and compassion, first toward ourselves, then toward others, including those we find difficult or even dislike. By regularly practicing metta, we train the mind to respond to anger and resentment with kindness and understanding rather than hostility. Over time, this practice can transform the way we relate to ourselves and others, helping us break the cycle of hatred. The challenge and reward of non-hatred. While non-hatred is a powerful practice, it is not always easy. In moments of intense anger or when we feel deeply wronged, choosing compassion over retaliation can feel counterintuitive, even impossible. It requires a conscious effort and a willingness to let go of the need to be right or to win. But while it may be difficult, the rewards of non-hatred are immense. When we practice non-hatred, we create the conditions for peace in our own lives. We reduce the mental and emotional turmoil that comes with anger, allowing space for joy, contentment, and clarity. Moreover, we contribute to a larger culture of peace. Every act of non-hatred, whether in our personal relationships or in the broader world, ripples outward, influencing those around us and creating the possibility of a more compassionate society. Chapter 3: Understanding the Roots of Hatred in Today's World. Hatred, as a deeply ingrained emotion, is as ancient as humanity itself. Yet, in today's world, it feels more pervasive, more immediate, and more dangerous than ever. From personal relationships and online interactions to political discourse and international conflicts, hatred manifests in countless ways, often escalating tensions and deepening divisions. Understanding the roots of hatred is the first step in addressing and transforming it, both within ourselves and in society. By doing so, we can create a more peaceful, compassionate world and bring greater peace to our own lives. The nature of hatred. To tackle hatred effectively, we must first recognize what it truly is. In the Buddhist tradition, hatred dosa is one of the three poisons, along with greed and delusion, that bind us to suffering. Hatred is a strong aversion or ill will that arises when we perceive a threat, an injustice, or an obstacle to our desires. It is reactive, emotional, and often irrational, fueled by fear, insecurity, and ignorance. Hatred distorts our perception of reality. When we are under its influence, we are less likely to see the situation or the other person clearly. We project our own fears, biases, and unresolved emotions onto the object of our hatred, creating a distorted view that justifies further anger. Hatred often grows stronger through repetition. The more we dwell on perceived wrongs or replay hurtful interactions, the more entrenched our feelings of animosity become. Hatred in modern society. In today's interconnected world, the roots of hatred have become more complex. Several cultural and societal factors contribute to the rise of hatred and hostility. Polarization and tribalism. Society today is increasingly polarized. Political, social, and religious ideologies have created echo chambers where people surround themselves with like-minded individuals and reject those with differing views. Social media algorithms reinforce these bubbles, showing us more of what we already believe and rarely exposing us to alternative perspectives. This tribalism fosters an us versus them mentality, which easily breeds hatred toward those we perceive as outsiders or threats to our identity. The speed and anonymity of online communication. The internet has revolutionized communication, but it has also created new platforms for hatred to thrive. Social media, in particular, enables quick, often thoughtless reactions. Anonymity emboldens individuals to express vitriol they might never say face to face. Online hate speech, bullying, and harassment have become rampant, further normalizing hostility and aggression in daily interactions. This constant barrage of negativity can desensitize us to hatred, making it seem acceptable or even justified. Fear and uncertainty. The modern world is marked by rapid change, economic inequality, and global crises such as pandemics, climate change, and political unrest. Fear and uncertainty about the future can trigger defensive responses, including anger and hatred toward perceived causes of these problems. Immigrants, minority groups, and those who differ from us in terms of religion, race, or socioeconomic status often become scapegoats for these larger societal fears, fueling xenophobia and other forms of discrimination. Historical and generational trauma. Hatred is often passed down through generations. Societies with histories of colonization, slavery, war, or systemic oppression carry deep wounds that manifest in ongoing cycles of hatred and violence. These unresolved traumas can perpetuate resentment and hostility, even among people who were not directly involved in the original conflicts. Addressing these historical legacies is essential to breaking the cycle of hatred in communities and nations. How hatred takes root in the mind. Hatred does not arise in a vacuum. It is the result of conditioned responses, reinforced over time through personal experience, societal influences, and habitual thought patterns. Understanding how hatred takes root in our minds is key to dismantling it. Fear and insecurity. At the core of much hatred is fear. We fear what we do not understand, and we fear losing what we value, whether that's our safety, identity, or sense of control. When fear arises, it often manifests as anger or aggression as a way to protect ourselves from perceived threats. For example, a person who feels economically insecure may develop hatred toward immigrants, believing that they are taking away jobs or resources. This fear-based hatred blinds us to the humanity of others and prevents us from seeing the situation objectively. Ego and attachment. The ego plays a significant role in the development of hatred. When we are attached to our beliefs, identities, our desires, anything that challenges them can feel like a personal attack. The ego reacts by creating distance or hostility toward the source of that challenge. In this way, hatred often arises when our sense of self is threatened, whether by a differing opinion, a perceived slight, or a societal change that makes us uncomfortable. Projection and bias. Hatred can also be a projection of our own unresolved emotions. When we are uncomfortable with aspects of ourselves such as our vulnerabilities, insecurities, or weaknesses, we may project those qualities onto others and despise them for it. For example, someone who struggles with self-worth might develop hatred toward people they perceive as more successful, attractive, or confident. This projection allows us to avoid dealing with our own inner conflicts by focusing our animosity outward. Reinforcement and habit. Once hatred takes root, it becomes a habitual response. Each time we react to a situation with hatred or anger, we reinforce that pattern, making it easier for those emotions to arise again in the future. This cycle is perpetuated by rumination, repeatedly thinking about perceived wrongs or injustices, which strengthens feelings of resentment and animosity. Practical steps for understanding and transforming hatred. The good news is that hatred is not an inevitable or fixed part of human nature. It can be understood, transformed, and ultimately transcended through mindfulness, compassion, and conscious effort. Here are some practical steps to help individuals and communities begin the process of dismantling hatred. Mindful awareness. The first step in transforming hatred is becoming aware of it. Hatred often arises unconsciously, as an automatic reaction to perceived threats or challenges. By practicing mindfulness, we can train ourselves to notice the initial spark of anger or ill will before it grows into full-blown hatred. When we catch these emotions early, we can pause, reflect, and choose a different response. A useful practice is to observe your thoughts and emotions without judgment. When you feel anger or hatred arising, acknowledge it. I am feeling anger right now. Simply naming the emotion creates a space between you and the reaction, allowing you to see it more clearly and objectively. Understanding the root causes. Once we become aware of hatred, the next step is to investigate its origins. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Or, what insecurity is this emotion highlighting? By probing beneath the surface of hatred, we often find fear, pain, or unresolved trauma. Understanding these root causes helps us approach the situation with compassion rather than reactivity. In moments of hatred, it's also helpful to examine the story we are telling ourselves. Often, our hatred is fueled by narratives we have constructed about other people or situations. Question these stories. Is this true? Am I seeing the whole picture? This practice helps dismantle the biases and assumptions that feed hatred. Cultivating compassion. Compassion is the antidote to hatred. It involves recognizing the shared humanity in all people, including those we dislike or oppose. To cultivate compassion, we must actively seek to understand the experiences and emotions of others, even those who seem radically different from us. A powerful practice is metta loving-kindness meditation. In this meditation, we send wishes of well-being and peace to ourselves, loved ones, neutral people, and eventually those we harbor hatred toward. By extending goodwill to all beings, we soften our hearts and dissolve the boundaries that fuel hatred. Breaking the cycle of reaction. When we find ourselves in a heated situation, whether online or in person, it's essential to break the cycle of reaction. Instead of responding to aggression with more aggression, take a moment to breathe and center yourself. Ask yourself, will my response contribute to peace, or will it escalate the situation? This doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or avoiding conflict. It means responding from a place of calm and clarity rather than reactivity. Over time, practicing this mindful approach helps create space for non-hatred to flourish in difficult interactions. Healing historical and collective trauma. On a larger scale, addressing hatred in society requires confronting the historical and collective traumas that fuel it. This can be done through truth and reconciliation processes, public acknowledgments of past wrongs, and creating spaces for dialogue and healing between divided communities. Societies must also invest in education that promotes empathy, critical thinking, and the ability to see things from multiple perspectives. By fostering a culture that values understanding over division, we can create a foundation for lasting peace. Conclusion: a path to peace. By understanding the roots of hatred in ourselves and in society, we can begin the work of transforming it. Hatred thrives on ignorance, fear, and reactivity, but when we cultivate awareness, compassion, and understanding, we create the conditions for peace to arise. In this way, the Buddha's teaching that hatred is never appeased by hatred, but by non-hatred alone, becomes not just a spiritual ideal, but a practical path to a more harmonious and compassionate world. As individuals, we can break the cycle of hatred in our own lives by addressing the fears and insecurities that fuel it. As a society, we can work toward healing the divisions and traumas that perpetuate hatred on a larger scale. This process requires patience, mindfulness, and a commitment to seeing the humanity in all beings, but it is the only path that leads to true peace. Chapter 4: Cultivating Compassion and Forgiveness in Today's World. In a society that often encourages competition, division, and self-interest, cultivating compassion and forgiveness can seem like a radical act. From social media disputes to global political conflicts, the tendency to react with anger and seek retribution is pervasive. However, the Buddha's teaching that hatred is never appeased by hatred offers an alternative path, one that leads not only to inner peace but also to healing in relationships and communities. Today, more than ever, the cultivation of compassion and forgiveness is crucial. Our interconnected world exposes us to constant disagreements, opposing views, and injustices. At the same time, modern culture often glorifies outrage and emotional reactions. In this chapter, we will explore how cultivating compassion and forgiveness, even in the face of hostility, can bring peace to our lives and foster a more harmonious world. Understanding compassion in a modern context. Compassion, at its core, is the ability to empathize with the suffering of others and to act with kindness in response. In modern society, where we are constantly bombarded with news of suffering from natural disasters to social injustices, many of us experience compassion fatigue, the feeling that we simply cannot care for everyone. However, true compassion is not about overwhelming ourselves with the suffering of the world. Instead, it is about maintaining a heart that is open to others' pain while recognizing our limits. In today's fast-paced, individualistic culture, compassion can be seen as a sign of weakness or naivety. People are often conditioned to think that self-preservation and personal success are paramount, and that responding to conflict or harm with kindness is a sign of passivity. However, as the Buddha taught, compassion is not passive, it is an active, courageous choice that requires strength and self-awareness. Why is compassion important in modern society? The benefits of cultivating compassion are immense, both for ourselves and others. On a personal level, developing compassion helps us to see beyond our immediate emotional reactions and to respond with empathy rather than anger. This shift allows us to approach conflicts with greater clarity and understanding, reducing the likelihood of escalating tensions. When we act out of compassion, we are less likely to fuel the cycle of hatred and revenge that so often dominates human interactions. Moreover, studies in psychology have shown that individuals who practice compassion experience greater emotional resilience, better relationships, and lower levels of stress. In a society where anxiety, depression, and loneliness are on the rise, cultivating compassion can be a powerful antidote to the sense of isolation and disconnection that many people feel. Practical steps to cultivate compassion in everyday life. Mindful awareness of others' suffering. The first step to cultivating compassion is becoming aware of the suffering of others. This does not mean overwhelming yourself with every tragedy in the news, but rather developing an attitude of mindfulness in your interactions with people. When someone lashes out at you, instead of reacting defensively, pause and consider what pain or fear might be motivating their behavior. This simple act of awareness can open the door to a more compassionate response. Practicing compassionate speech. In a world of social media and instant communication, our words carry tremendous power. Practicing compassionate speech means being mindful of how our words affect others. Before responding to a harsh comment or criticism, ask yourself, is this response kind? Will it contribute to healing or harm? By choosing our words carefully, we can break the cycle of anger and hurt that often spirals out of control in online and face-to-face interactions. Compassionate listening. In today's divisive political and social landscape, people often talk past each other rather than engaging in genuine dialogue. Compassionate listening involves truly hearing the concerns, fears, and desires of others, even those with whom we strongly disagree. This does not mean we have to agree with them, but it allows us to connect with their humanity and respond in a way that is respectful and kind. The power of forgiveness in modern life. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood concepts in our culture. Many people see it as letting someone off the hook or condoning harmful behavior. However, in the Buddhist context, forgiveness is not about excusing or forgetting wrongdoing. It is about releasing the anger, resentment, and desire for revenge that can consume us after being wronged. Why is forgiveness crucial for inner peace? Holding on to anger or grudges only intensifies our suffering. When we refuse to forgive, we carry the weight of that resentment with us, allowing it to affect our mood, relationships, and overall well-being. In modern psychology, this is often referred to as the burden of unresolved anger. The Buddha's teaching on non-hatred reminds us that by forgiving, we are not granting approval to harmful actions, but rather freeing ourselves from the emotional chains that bind us to that suffering. In today's culture, where victimhood and retribution are often glorified, forgiveness can be seen as weakness. Yet, forgiveness is an act of strength. It takes courage to let go of the desire for revenge and to choose healing over hostility. The science of forgiveness. Modern scientific research has demonstrated the profound benefits of forgiveness. Studies show that individuals who practice forgiveness experience lower levels of anxiety, depression, and stress. Forgiveness has also been linked to better physical health, including lower blood pressure and a stronger immune system. This research aligns with the Buddha's teaching that by letting go of hatred, we not only create peace in our minds but also foster health and well-being in our bodies. Practical steps to forgive. Acknowledge the pain. Forgiveness does not mean pretending that the harm never happened. The first step is to acknowledge the hurt or injustice that was done. Allow yourself to feel the emotions that arise: anger, sadness, betrayal without judgment. This step is essential for processing the pain in a healthy way. Recognize the humanity of the offender. The Buddha's teachings encourage us to see the person who wronged us not as an enemy, but as a human being who, like us, is prone to mistakes and imperfections. This doesn't mean excusing their behavior, but it allows us to let go of dehumanizing anger and to see them with more compassion. Ask yourself, what suffering or ignorance might have led them to act this way? Let go of the desire for revenge. The hardest part of forgiveness is releasing the desire for the other person to suffer as we have. This desire is natural, but it ultimately harms us more than anyone else. Through mindfulness and reflection, we can begin to let go of this urge for retaliation and focus on our own healing. Forgiving yourself. Often, the person we have the hardest time forgiving is ourselves. Whether it's a past mistake or a regret we carry, self-forgiveness is crucial to cultivating inner peace. Acknowledge your imperfections and recognize that, like everyone else, you are capable of growth and change. Cultivating compassion and forgiveness in larger communities. While compassion and forgiveness start with the individual, their impact can ripple out to communities and society as a whole. In modern society, we are witnessing increasing polarization, with people retreating into ideological bubbles and refusing to engage with those who hold different views. This has led to a breakdown in dialogue, mutual understanding, and, ultimately, social cohesion. Non-hatred is a foundation for social change. Movements for social justice are often driven by anger at injustice, and rightly so. However, the Buddha's teaching reminds us that sustainable change is built on non-hatred. Responding to injustice with hatred and violence only perpetuates the very cycles of oppression that we seek to dismantle. Non-hatred does not mean passivity or acceptance of injustice. It means responding to injustice with wisdom, compassion, and a commitment to the well-being of all. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. understood this principle well. Their movements were built on the foundation of non-violence and non-hatred, even in the face of violent opposition. They recognized that true justice could only be achieved by transforming not just laws but hearts and minds. By practicing non-hatred, they were able to inspire others to see their common humanity and work toward a more just and compassionate society. Bringing compassion and forgiveness into our daily lives. The practices of compassion and forgiveness are not reserved for saints or activists. They are tools that all of us can use to bring more peace and harmony into our everyday lives. Whether we are dealing with a rude colleague, a family argument, or a political disagreement, there are countless opportunities to choose non-hatred over hatred. Daily practices to cultivate non-hatred. Morning reflection. Begin each day with a short meditation or reflection on compassion. Set the intention to respond to any challenges or conflicts that arise with kindness and understanding. Compassionate breathing. When you notice anger or frustration rising within you, take a moment to pause and focus on your breath. As you inhale, imagine yourself breathing in compassion. As you exhale, imagine letting go of anger or resentment. Gratitude practice. Practicing gratitude helps to shift our focus from what we lack or what has gone wrong to what we appreciate in our lives. This shift in perspective can soften our hearts and make it easier to respond to others with kindness. Journaling. At the end of each day, take a few moments to reflect on any interactions where you struggled to practice compassion or forgiveness. Write about how you felt and how you might approach a similar situation differently in the future. Conclusion. A path to peace. In a world filled with conflict, anger, and division, the Buddha's teaching on non-hatred offers a path to peace that is both timeless and urgently needed today. By cultivating compassion and forgiveness in our own lives, we contribute to the creation of a more harmonious society, one in which hatred is not met with hatred, but with understanding, kindness, and love. The practice of non-hatred is not easy, but it is transformative. It allows us to break free from the cycle of anger and revenge that causes so much suffering, and it opens the door to healing and reconciliation. Through compassion and forgiveness, we create the conditions for true peace both within ourselves and in the world around us. Chapter 5. Non-hatred in daily life. The principle of non-hatred can feel lofty and distant, especially in a world where hatred and conflict seem to permeate every aspect of life, from our personal relationships to societal tensions and even global politics. However, the Buddha's teaching on non-hatred is not reserved for monks or scholars meditating in isolation. It is meant to be practiced in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, in the midst of our most challenging interactions and difficult situations. Non-hatred is a tool that can help us navigate the complexities of modern life. In today's fast-paced, hyperconnected world, where divisive rhetoric is amplified by social media and conflict often seems to be the norm, the practice of non-hatred offers a transformative alternative. This chapter will explore how non-hatred can be applied to the realities of contemporary society, how it can help people overcome the stress, frustration, and anger they experience, and how, through practical actions, we can break free from the cycle of hatred. Understanding modern triggers for hatred. Before diving into how we can practice non-hatred, it's important to understand what fuels hatred in today's world. Unlike in the Buddha's time, modern life presents a whole new set of triggers that can ignite feelings of resentment and hostility. Some common sources of anger and frustration include social media and online culture. Social media platforms have transformed the way we communicate, but they have also magnified divisiveness. Online anonymity often encourages people to say things they wouldn't say in person. Heated arguments on social platforms, fueled by polarized opinions, can lead to a sense of us versus them thinking, where others are quickly labeled as enemies simply for holding opposing views. This constant exposure to anger and aggression can make us feel more hostile, defensive, and disconnected from others. Cultural and political divisions. Modern societies are more diverse than ever, which should ideally lead to mutual understanding and enrichment. However, this diversity can also lead to tension when people feel their values, beliefs, or ways of life are being threatened. Political disagreements, especially in today's highly charged political climate, can escalate into deep-seated animosity. Economic stress and competition, the pressures of modern life, especially in competitive work environments, can lead to stress, frustration, and resentment. Many people feel overwhelmed by financial pressures, job insecurity, and the constant need to get ahead. When faced with such challenges, it's easy to project frustration onto others, whether it's co-workers, family members, or even strangers. Personal grievances and resentments. Beyond societal issues, we all face personal conflicts, whether it's a family member who has hurt us, a friend who has let us down, or a romantic partner who has betrayed us. These individual grievances can fester, leading to cycles of anger and emotional pain that are difficult to break. Understanding these triggers allows us to recognize when we are falling into patterns of hatred. By recognizing them, we can begin to shift our responses in healthier, more constructive ways. Practicing non-hatred in our interactions. Non-hatred is not about suppressing our emotions or avoiding conflict. It is about transforming how we respond to difficult situations and challenging people. It is the conscious decision to respond with compassion, understanding, and patience, rather than reacting out of anger or frustration. Here are some practical steps to bring non-hatred into daily life. Mindful communication. One of the most common areas where hatred arises is in our communication with others. Whether it's an argument with a partner, a disagreement with a colleague, or a heated political discussion, the way we communicate can either fuel conflict or foster understanding. Practicing mindful communication means pausing before we speak and asking ourselves, is what I'm about to say true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? This simple reflection can drastically change the tone of our interactions. Rather than reacting impulsively, we can choose words that are constructive and compassionate. It also involves listening mindfully, truly hearing what the other person is saying without immediately planning a rebuttal. Listening with empathy can often dissolve anger and open the door to understanding, even in the midst of disagreement. Embracing vulnerability and compassion. When someone wrongs us, our instinct is often to protect ourselves, to put up emotional barriers, or to retaliate. However, non-hatred invites us to embrace vulnerability and extend compassion, even to those who hurt us. In modern society, this can be particularly challenging, as we are often conditioned to view vulnerability as a weakness. But when we allow ourselves to feel compassion for others, especially those who are angry or aggressive, we begin to see their suffering. This doesn't mean accepting or condoning harmful behavior, but recognizing that people who act out of hatred or cruelty are often doing so from a place of pain or fear. For example, if a colleague at work consistently criticizes or undermines you, rather than responding with anger, try to understand where their behavior is coming from. They may be dealing with their own insecurities, stress, or frustrations. By viewing the situation through the lens of compassion, you can diffuse the emotional charge and respond in a way that fosters resolution rather than escalating conflict. Setting healthy boundaries. Practicing non-hatred does not mean allowing others to mistreat us. It is important to set healthy boundaries and protect ourselves from harm. However, setting boundaries can be done without harboring resentment or ill will. For instance, if someone is consistently disrespectful, you can firmly and respectfully communicate your boundaries without responding with anger or hatred. Non-hatred empowers us to assert our needs without creating enemies. It teaches us that we can stand up for ourselves and others while still maintaining compassion for those who are challenging us. Responding to social and political conflict. In today's polarized world, it is easy to fall into the trap of demonizing those with opposing political views or cultural perspectives. We see this play out in social media battles, news commentary, and even family gatherings. But responding to ideological differences with hatred only deepens divisions. Non-hatred in this context means engaging in dialogue with openness and curiosity rather than hostility. It means recognizing that the people on the other side of an issue are human beings with their own fears, experiences, and reasons for believing what they do. This doesn't mean agreeing with harmful ideas, but it does mean avoiding the dehumanization of others. Practically speaking, this could involve reaching out to someone with whom you disagree and having a respectful conversation. It means listening without the intent to argue, but to understand. This kind of dialogue can help bridge divides and build mutual respect, even when opinions differ. Transforming hatred into peace through daily practices. Incorporating non-hatred into daily life is not something that happens overnight. It requires ongoing practice and dedication. Fortunately, there are several concrete practices that can help us cultivate non-hatred and bring peace into our lives. Loving-kindness meditation. One of the most effective ways to cultivate non-hatred is through loving-kindness meditation, a practice where we intentionally generate feelings of compassion and goodwill toward ourselves and others. The meditation begins by focusing on yourself, silently repeating phrases such as, "May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. May I live with ease." Once you have cultivated feelings of love and compassion for yourself, you extend those same wishes to others, starting with loved ones, then to neutral people, and finally, to those with whom you have conflicts or difficult relationships. By practicing loving-kindness meditation regularly, we train our minds to respond with compassion rather than hatred, even in challenging situations. Journaling for reflection. Journaling can be a powerful tool for processing emotions and reflecting on how we respond to difficult situations. When feelings of anger or resentment arise, taking the time to write about the experience can help us gain insight into our triggers and patterns of behavior. By exploring these feelings in writing, we can often identify ways to respond more skillfully in the future. For example, if you had a heated argument with a friend or family member, journaling can help you unpack the emotions that came up, consider the other person's perspective, and reflect on how you might approach the situation differently next time. This kind of self-reflection can transform how we handle conflict and help us practice non-hatred in real time. Practicing gratitude. Cultivating gratitude is another powerful way to counteract feelings of resentment or frustration. When we focus on what we appreciate in our lives, it becomes easier to let go of minor irritations or grievances. Gratitude shifts our perspective from what's wrong to what's right, helping us approach situations with a more balanced, compassionate mindset. A simple daily gratitude practice such as writing down 3 things you are grateful for each day can create a mental shift that reduces the likelihood of falling into patterns of anger or hatred. Over time, this practice builds a sense of contentment and peace that permeates our interactions with others. Bringing non-hatred into the broader society. The ripple effect of practicing non-hatred in our individual lives can have a profound impact on society as a whole. When we cultivate peace and compassion within ourselves, we contribute to creating a more peaceful world. Non-hatred becomes a way of being that influences not only our personal relationships but also the communities and environments we are part of. By choosing non-hatred, we set an example for others. When we respond to conflict. Chapter 6: The Eternal Law of Non-Hatred in Today's Society. In the teachings of the Buddha, the principle that hatred is never appeased by hatred is not just an ancient maxim but a timeless law that resonates deeply within the fabric of our modern society. This law points to an essential truth about human relationships and the nature of conflict. In an era where division, animosity, and hostility seem prevalent, understanding and embodying the principle of non-hatred can pave the way for individual peace and collective harmony. The cycle of hatred in contemporary culture. In today's world, we witness hatred manifesting in various forms: social media conflicts, political polarization, and even personal relationships strained by misunderstanding and anger. The rapid spread of information, often sensationalized, fosters environments where hatred can thrive. Whether through public discourse or personal exchanges, the cycle of hatred can escalate quickly. For instance, online platforms allow individuals to express opinions with minimal accountability, often leading to harsh comments and attacks. Anonymity can embolden people to voice hateful sentiments that they might hesitate to express in face-to-face interactions. The comment section of social media becomes a battleground where anger and resentment are amplified rather than addressed. This trend not only deepens societal divides but also perpetuates a culture of hostility, where understanding and compassion are overshadowed by the immediacy of reactionary responses. Consider the example of political discourse in recent years. Debates that once revolved around policies and principles have devolved into personal attacks and sweeping generalizations. Rather than engaging in constructive dialogue, many resort to labeling opponents as enemies rather than fellow human beings with valid perspectives. This not only breeds animosity but also leads to a profound sense of isolation for individuals on either side of the debate. Understanding the Buddha's teaching, we can see that this cycle of hatred only perpetuates suffering for everyone involved. By responding to aggression with more aggression, we create an environment where resolution feels impossible, and animosity becomes the norm. Breaking the cycle, the power of non-hatred. To break this cycle, we must turn our attention to the transformative power of non-hatred. The concept of non-hatred encompasses a variety of qualities: compassion, forgiveness, understanding, and love. These qualities are not merely passive responses, they are active choices that we can make in our daily interactions, regardless of the circumstances. Practicing non-hatred begins with awareness. By recognizing when feelings of hatred arise, whether they stem from personal grievances or broader societal issues, we can pause and assess our responses. Instead of immediately reacting with anger or disdain, we can choose to approach situations with a mindset of understanding and compassion. This process of awareness is critical in our daily lives. For example, when faced with a disagreement with a coworker, instead of allowing irritation to dictate our response, we can take a moment to consider their perspective. What might they be feeling? What underlying fears or frustrations could be driving their actions? By stepping into their shoes, we cultivate empathy and begin to dissolve the instinctual desire for retaliation. In practice, one might adopt the following steps in challenging interactions. Pause and reflect. When negative emotions arise, take a moment to breathe deeply and allow those feelings to settle. Reflect on the root causes of these emotions. Practice empathy. Consider the other person's circumstances and motivations. What struggles might they be facing that could inform their behavior? Respond with kindness. Rather than reacting in anger, choose a response that promotes understanding. Use language that is constructive rather than accusatory. Seek common ground. Look for shared values or goals, even in contentious situations. This can create a foundation for mutual respect and collaboration. By implementing these steps, we can transform conflicts into opportunities for growth and understanding. Non-hatred not only fosters better relationships but also cultivates a more compassionate society. The role of compassion in healing divisions. Compassion is a key element in the practice of non-hatred. It allows us to see beyond our own pain and recognize the shared humanity in others. When we approach interactions with compassion, we create spaces where dialogue can flourish instead of fester. In a practical sense, we can cultivate compassion through simple daily practices. Engaging in metta, loving-kindness meditation, for example, can be a powerful tool. This meditation encourages us to extend feelings of love and goodwill not only to those we care about but also to those with whom we experience conflict. During metta meditation, we typically start by silently repeating phrases such as, "May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. May I live with ease." As we become comfortable with directing these sentiments toward ourselves, we gradually extend them to loved ones, acquaintances, and even those we struggle to understand. This practice helps dissolve the barriers of hatred and resentment, allowing us to open our hearts to all beings. Consider the impact of this practice in communities. In neighborhoods facing social tension, community leaders could organize metta meditation sessions. By fostering environments where individuals can share their experiences and extend compassion to one another, communities can begin to heal the wounds created by division and hatred. Forgiveness is a tool for liberation. Forgiveness is another essential aspect of the non-hatred principle. It is not merely an act of absolution but a profound gift we give to ourselves. Holding on to grudges and resentment weighs us down and perpetuates our own suffering. By choosing to forgive, we liberate ourselves from the chains of hatred and open the door to peace. In practice, forgiveness can begin with a simple act of acknowledgement. Recognizing the hurt caused by others is important, but it is equally vital to understand how clinging to that hurt affects our own mental and emotional health. Forgiveness does not mean condoning harmful actions, rather, it means choosing to let go of the emotional burden that comes with them. Here are practical steps to cultivate forgiveness in daily life. Acknowledge the hurt. Identify the emotions tied to the hurt you feel. Name them without judgment: anger, sadness, betrayal. Reflect on the impact. Consider how holding on to this hurt affects your well-being. Recognize that it can lead to cycles of negativity in your life. Choose to forgive. Make a conscious decision to forgive, understanding that it is a process. It may take time, and that's okay. Release the burden. Visualize the act of letting go of your resentment. This could be through journaling, speaking it aloud, or even a symbolic gesture. Reinforce positive thoughts. Once you've made the decision to forgive, redirect your thoughts toward positivity and healing. By embedding these practices into our lives, we not only free ourselves from past grievances but also model forgiveness for those around us. This, in turn, fosters an environment where forgiveness becomes the norm rather than the exception. Building a culture of non-hatred. Creating a culture of non-hatred requires collective effort. As individuals practice non-hatred in their personal lives, communities can come together to support these values on a larger scale. Initiatives that promote understanding and dialogue among diverse groups can be instrumental. For instance, community forums that encourage open discussions on contentious topics can create spaces for individuals to share their experiences and perspectives. These forums can help bridge the gaps created by misunderstanding and hatred. Furthermore, educational programs focused on emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and empathy can prepare younger generations to navigate interpersonal relationships with wisdom and compassion. Schools and community centers can serve as platforms for these teachings, helping to cultivate a generation that prioritizes understanding over division. Social media, too, can be harnessed as a force for good. Rather than being a breeding ground for hatred, online platforms can promote messages of kindness and compassion. Campaigns encouraging users to share stories of reconciliation, compassion, and understanding can shift the narrative and foster a culture of non-hatred. The eternal law, a guiding principle. The eternal law of non-hatred is not merely an idealistic vision, it is a practical guide for navigating the complexities of modern life. It teaches us that responding to hatred with hatred only perpetuates suffering, while non-hatred creates pathways to peace. In a society grappling with increasing polarization, embracing non-hatred can become a revolutionary act. It requires courage, vulnerability, and a commitment to understanding. By choosing to practice non-hatred, we not only enhance our own lives but contribute to a world where compassion reigns over conflict. As we move forward, let us carry the wisdom of the Buddha's teachings in our hearts. Let us become beacons of non-hatred in our communities, inspiring others to join us on this journey toward peace and understanding. Together, we can create a ripple effect that transcends personal relationships and fosters global harmony, proving that love and compassion will always triumph over hatred. By grounding the teachings of non-hatred in practical application, we not only honor the Buddha's wisdom but also work toward a brighter future for ourselves and generations to come. The path may not always be easy, but it is always worth pursuing. Let us embark on this journey together, cultivating a culture of non-hatred, compassion, and peace in our hearts and in our world. Conclusion: a path to peace in today's world. In an age where divisions seem to widen daily, and hostility often dominates discourse, the Buddha's teaching on non-hatred emerges as a beacon of hope and a guiding principle for personal and societal transformation. The verse from the Dhammapada, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal," not only articulates a fundamental truth but also provides a practical framework for addressing the complexities of modern life. Understanding the challenge of hatred today. Hatred manifests in numerous forms in our contemporary society, from personal conflicts to systemic issues like racism, sexism, and economic disparity. Social media amplifies voices of anger and frustration, often leading to echo chambers where hatred breeds more hatred. The anonymity of online interactions can embolden individuals to express vitriol that they might otherwise refrain from in face-to-face encounters. As a result, the cycle of hostility continues unabated, leaving many feeling isolated, angry, and hopeless. The challenges we face today are not merely external, they are deeply rooted in our internal landscapes. Hatred often arises from feelings of fear, insecurity, and inadequacy. These emotions can fester, driving wedges between individuals and communities. In this context, the Buddha's teaching becomes not just relevant but essential. It invites us to reflect on our internal responses and the impact of those responses on our external relationships. The imperative of non-hatred. The practice of non-hatred stands as a counter-narrative to the prevailing attitudes that permeate many societies today. Non-hatred is not a passive stance, rather, it is an active commitment to love, compassion, and understanding. It requires a conscious effort to cultivate positive emotions and respond to hostility with kindness. To illustrate, let's consider a common scenario, a heated discussion about political beliefs among friends or family. In such situations, it is easy to resort to sarcasm, insults, or dismissive attitudes, which only escalate tensions. However, choosing non-hatred in this context means listening actively, acknowledging differing viewpoints, and responding with empathy. This approach can transform what could be a destructive argument into a constructive dialogue. Practical steps to foster non-hatred. Mindful communication. One of the first steps in cultivating non-hatred is to practice mindful communication. Before reacting to a provocative statement or action, take a moment to pause and breathe. This brief pause can create space for clarity and compassion. Ask yourself, how might this person be feeling? What underlying fears or insecurities could be driving their behavior? By shifting your perspective from judgment to understanding, you open the door to non-hatred. Empathy and compassion. Empathy is the cornerstone of non-hatred. It involves stepping into someone else's shoes and trying to understand their experiences and feelings. Engage in conversations that allow for the sharing of stories and personal experiences. When we listen with empathy, we dismantle the barriers of misunderstanding that often lead to hatred. Practicing forgiveness. Forgiveness is a vital component of non-hatred. Holding onto grudges or resentment weighs heavily on our hearts and minds, perpetuating a cycle of suffering. To practice forgiveness, begin by acknowledging your feelings. Understand that forgiveness does not mean condoning harmful behavior, rather, it is a choice to release yourself from the shackles of anger. Reflect on how you can let go of past hurts and move forward with compassion. Engagement in community. Engage with your community in positive, constructive ways. This could be through volunteering, joining local advocacy groups, or participating in community dialogues. When we connect with others who may hold different views or experiences, we create opportunities for understanding and healing. Collective efforts to address societal issues can serve as powerful reminders of our shared humanity. Mindfulness practices. Incorporating mindfulness into daily routines can significantly contribute to the cultivation of non-hatred. Mindfulness meditation helps develop awareness of our thoughts and emotions, allowing us to observe feelings of anger or resentment without acting on them. As we become more aware of our reactions, we can choose more constructive responses. Education and awareness. Educate yourself and others about the impacts of hatred and the benefits of non-hatred. Understanding the historical contexts of systemic issues, such as racism and sexism, can foster empathy and awareness. Workshops, books, and discussions centered around these topics can illuminate the ways in which hatred operates and how non-hatred can offer solutions. The ripple effect of non-hatred. Implementing non-hatred in our lives not only transforms our personal relationships but also creates a ripple effect throughout our communities. When we practice non-hatred, we become models of peace and compassion. Our actions inspire others to adopt similar attitudes, contributing to a cultural shift toward understanding and love. Consider the impact of movements led by figures like Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King Jr. Their commitment to non-violence and reconciliation in the face of extreme adversity demonstrated how non-hatred could dismantle deeply entrenched systems of oppression. Their legacies remind us that the practice of non-hatred can catalyze societal change, challenging injustices while fostering unity and understanding. Building a culture of peace. Creating a culture of peace requires collective effort. It demands that individuals, communities, and institutions recognize the profound truth of the Buddha's teaching. When we collectively embrace non-hatred, we dismantle the structures that perpetuate conflict and division. Educational institutions, workplaces, and community organizations play vital roles in promoting non-hatred. Initiatives that encourage dialogue, conflict resolution, and emotional intelligence can help cultivate environments where understanding and compassion flourish. The role of technology. In our interconnected world, technology can either exacerbate hatred or serve as a tool for non-hatred. Social media platforms, while often breeding grounds for negativity, can also be powerful vehicles for positive change. Campaigns promoting kindness, empathy, and understanding can reach vast audiences, sparking important conversations and promoting peaceful interactions. However, it is crucial to approach technology mindfully. Engaging with social media thoughtfully means being aware of its potential to escalate tensions. Consider limiting exposure to toxic content and curating your online interactions to promote positivity and understanding. The personal journey of non-hatred. The journey to embody non-hatred is deeply personal and often fraught with challenges. It requires ongoing self-reflection and a commitment to personal growth. As we strive to practice non-hatred, we will encounter moments of frustration and setbacks. It is essential to approach these moments with kindness towards ourselves. Recognize that the path to peace is a journey, not a destination. Engage in self-compassion during difficult times. When feelings of anger arise, instead of succumbing to them, acknowledge your emotions and remind yourself of your commitment to non-hatred. This practice allows for growth and resilience, ultimately leading to a deeper understanding of oneself and others. The collective responsibility for peace. In our shared pursuit of peace, we must recognize our collective responsibility to contribute to a world free from hatred. Each of us holds the power to influence our surroundings through our thoughts, words, and actions. When we commit to embodying non-hatred, we create an environment conducive to healing and understanding. Communities thrive when individuals prioritize kindness and empathy. Initiatives that promote interfaith dialogues, cultural exchange, and community-building activities can foster connections among diverse groups. By coming together and engaging in shared experiences, we dismantle the barriers that often divide us. Conclusion. A call to action. As we conclude this exploration of the Buddha's teaching on non-hatred, let us recognize the profound potential within each of us to contribute to a more compassionate world. The path to peace begins with a single step and intention to practice non-hatred in our daily lives. It calls for courage, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to love and understanding. In this time of upheaval and division, let us embrace the wisdom of the Buddha's words and make a conscious choice to respond to hatred with non-hatred. Together, we can create ripples of compassion that extend far beyond our immediate circles, fostering a culture of peace that uplifts individuals and communities alike. By choosing non-hatred, we not only transform our own lives but also contribute to a legacy of understanding and harmony for future generations. The law of non-hatred is indeed eternal. It is up to us to embody this truth and manifest it in our world today. Let this be our call to action, to live with intention, to choose love over hate, and to forge a path toward a more peaceful and compassionate future. The journey may be challenging, but the rewards inner peace, healthier relationships, and a more harmonious society are well worth the effort. Together, we can make a difference and create a world where hatred has no place and love reigns supreme. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's reading and found it inspiring. We look forward to seeing you next time as we continue our journey through the teachings of the Buddha. Your presence means a lot to us, and we can't wait to share more wisdom with you. Until then, take care and stay mindful.